When Rathnacuda took his father's place in 263, he immediately set off on an extended trip to the steppe, directly participating in the aggressive settlement of the north. In fact, he would completely abandon the trappings of civility, returning to his roots with the practices of his ancestors. For example, he totally refused to settle at the royal complex in Tafros at any point during the year, instead spending all of his time either on campaign or on the steppe, removing himself and his clan from the rotating system entirely. He also commanded a mounted minimum for the armies of the various clans, making it expressly illegal for infantry and footmen to make up the bulk of any force. Beyond returning to old traditions, however, he also introduced his own, which he believed were more in line with the spirit of the steppe. This included a practice of polygamy, wherein he would accumulate wives and house them at the royal complex at Tafros, which would fulfill its new purpose as a place to keep his wives. At his ascension, he had 3 wives, all Scythian, proffered by major clans in the hopes of gaining his favor. There were some dissatisfied murmurings, but until he made some major mistake, it was not possible to challenge him. Indeed, his settlement of the north was more rapid and far more violent than that of his father, settling all land between the Barathnes and Tanais rivers by 258. In 253, Scythia was called to war by Armenia, defending against an invasion by Cappadocia and Pontus. This was a quick war, with Armenia penetrating deep into Cappadocia, and Scythian warriors bravely sailing the Black Sea, ravaging Pontus. By 252, the war was over, and Armenia had once again proved its power to those nearby who would see it undone. After this, Rathnacuda would continue his wild ways, having brought back 3 more wives, this time 2 Hellenic and 1 Armenian. Much was said of his wife collecting, and his eschewing of the family life his father so happily embraced. It was thought that his harem was a way to avoid the potential pain of loss within a close family, but whatever the case, he was already a prolific patriarch, boasting nearly 10 children, 7 of them sons. These children, too, he left at Tafros, to be raised by their mothers and mentored by fellow men of the Agrid clan. This was how he spent the majority of his youth, hunting and riding and fathering. In 252, to the west, Santonia made a major push into Germania, and Lucania won a major victory against Tuscia, which was so devastating they were knocked from their imperial pedestal back down to the level of kingdom. Indeed, as Lucania was carving up Etruscan territory, they gained the city of Rome in the process. They debated whether or not to completely raze the city, as Rome and her people were once a great enemy, but ultimately decided to leave it be as the jewel of her subjects. Meanwhile, back in Scythia, Rathnacuda made clear his more hands-off approach to governance, which allowed trade and commerce to flourish under his reign, ironic for his wrathful and martial disposition. In 250, the regional balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean completely changed after Macedon lost a war to Egypt, which conquered Cyprus, half of Crete, and even a significant chunk of the Peloponnese, taking Argos as the regional capital of its new European holding. The Hellenic pharaohs of Egypt, descendants of Alexander's ancient conquest, styled themselves as the Lagid dynasty, under Cleopatra I. Back in Scythia, trade links with Armenia had made Scythia quite wealthy, and forged a strong bond between the two as Armenia consolidated its power in Anatolia. In 243, the Gauls of the west continued to solidify their territories, taking the example of Santonia and applying it to themselves. Namely, the Gaulish tribes of Remia and Treveria established themselves as regional powers, and through their alliance with one another, a check upon the great power of Santonia. In May of 242, this relative peace ended when Sarvan Rathnacuda Agarid returned from his time on the steppe, and, in the courtyard of the royal compound, in front of all the clan leaders, and his 13 wives, and his 21 children, he sacrificed his favorite horse to Thagamassatus, the Scythian god of war, and covered himself in its blood. He then, wordlessly, mounted a new horse, soaked with gore, and rode east to the Bosporan kingdom, and declared a war of conquest upon them. Thousands of horsemen rallied, answering the call of their wild lord. The Bosporans were caught totally unprepared, having been notified of no hostilities or provided any casus belli. The Scythians charged across the verdant May grasses of the steppe, trampling wildflowers underfoot as they came to the cities of Khatis, Gura, and Bashkra. They washed over these places like a wave of violence, rushing their city gates, manned by their complacent local guards. These three cities had no siege, and were instead totally overcome, Scythians pillaging them completely and reducing them to ashes. The Bosporan Greeks finally mounted a scattered response by June, halting Rathnacuda at the city of Rogoi, which boasted strong walls and a multi-layered system of ditches and moats so as to be as hostile as possible to approaching cavalry. The new basileus of the Bosporans, Cleombrotus Spartacid, who bore the reputation of kinslayer after it was said he poisoned his uncle for the throne, was staying in Rogoi at the time, and had overseen a recent renovation of its various defenses through the patronage of the royal treasury. Rathnacuda demanded his surrender, his terms delivered via a slave boy from Cappadocia who served as messenger in this instance. The terms at hand were to surrender all land north of the fortress of Khatis, as well as a monthly tribute. Cleombrotus responded by crucifying him above the front gate. As such, a brutal siege ensued over the course of the next month. Rathnacuda's strategy was to clip the wings of birds seen flying from the city, his archers so accurate so as to only minorly injure them. These birds, pigeons, and crows, and even some owls, were nursed back to health in secret until they were able to fly again, and on the last day of the month, they were released with satchels of burning straw and pitch tied to their claws. The birds returned to their homes behind the walls, where they in some cases perched and in other cases panicked, setting the trees and gardens of Rogoi alight, burning the city down from within. The Greeks clamored to escape. Whoever survived the flames and ran across the major gate was cut down by the swift arrows of Rathnacuda's mounted men. Rogoi was completely destroyed, and the Scythians picked out what they could from the ashes, including the charred remains of Cleombrotus, his brother Deimachos assuming the throne, before being killed by his brother Cephalon, who offered a limited peace to the Scythians, giving them Khatis. Rathnacuda refused his peace and continued to ravage the Greeks. He fought in the most dangerous of battles, at the front of the largest of armies, and often wore a hood of black sackcloth upon his head, riding into battle completely naked so nobody knew who he was. Though this eccentric and frankly terrifying habit soon had the opposite effect, identifying him in particular and earning him the name of the Carvzagat, meaning the monster of the north. Indeed, Rathnacuda was known to his people by one name, his own name, and known to the foreigners as another, the Carvzagat, a blood-soaked horror that knows not the fear of the blade. This preceded a major Scythian push, conquering far more than they had initially demanded or intended. The Armenians soon joined of their own accord, establishing their own southern foothold by 238. By 237, Basileus Cephalon came to surrender personally to Rathnacuda, who was dressed as the terrifying Carvzagat himself, or rather, itself. As the Basileus bowed his head in defeat, Rathnacuda drove a crude tent spike into the back of his head and killed his guards. A messenger and scribe that went with him to record the surrender for the records of the Bosporan kingdom asked him why he killed the king under no provocation, to which Rathnacuda responded simply, "Because you people cannot do anything about it." The war then ended with the ascension of Cephalon's cousin, Polyperchon Spartacid, who accepted the terms. As such, Scythia took the best, most fruitful northern lands of the Bosporan kingdom, taking them as its own for a possession. The Greeks still had to make peace with the Armenians, however, and the two would continue to battle for some time yet, with the Armenians achieving a final victory over Cappadocia at around the same time. So, Rathnacuda came riding home with the bounty of a nation upon his steed, including 4 more wives, bringing him to his latest total of 30 wives, and by 235, 32 children, 20 of them sons. He would resume his settlement of the north, and even took to donning his Kvarzagat countenance, riding wild into the untamed steppe beneath the moonlight. Indeed, after this most recent war, known as the Second Greco-Scythian War, his identity as the Kvarzagat became mythologized by the people of the regions beyond Scythia, characterizing it as a monstrous centaur in a black hood who can outrun any man or steed and feeds on the flesh of the living. This nightmarish creature, based on the deeds of the Sarvan, would take on a life of its own and become an ingrained part of the regional culture for decades to come. Men in neighboring Getia and Dahe even getting magical warding tattoos to fend off the mythical beast, who lived in the corner of their minds as a monster that could very well be out there, waiting for them. But, aside from this, Scythia would enter a period of peace, gradually expanding into the uninhabited parts of the Great Eurasian Steppe to the north. Rathnacuda was unhinged, yes, but at least for now, he was content. However, beyond the horizon, and beyond his periphery of concern, there was someone who was not nearly as content with Scythia's commanding position, nor that of her ally, Armenia. This figure was Basileus Antiochos II Seleucid, of the Seleucid Empire, who was marching his armies slowly, inevitably west, towards the setting sun, with the clandestine intention to conquer all that its red evening rays touch upon the land.